Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Psalm 120, a prayer of deliverance from slander. Now, this psalm begins actually a whole collection of psalms known as the Songs of Ascent. Psalm 120 all the way to 134, that's going to be 15 psalms. Each have the same superscription, a song of ascents. Notice the ascents are plural, the song is singular, and each one has that title. So there's 15 songs, plural, of ascents, plural. Some of them in their superscriptions add either of David, Psalm 122, 124, 131, and 133 are all going to be said to be Psalms of David. There's also one of Solomon in 127, and then the others just have songs of ascent with no further description. There are references to Jerusalem and to the temple. Uh, some have taken these as pilgrim songs, that is, uh, songs that are sung as people are headed to Jerusalem to worship at the temple, and they're on their way. And you're actually going to see a number of references here, not necessarily in this first psalm, but in the rest of the collection. Some have also felt that some of these songs are sung in the temple, and I think that's entirely possible. Indeed, there is a old tradition. Tradition is found in the Mishnah, two different places, both in Midot 2:5 and also in Sukkah chapter 5 verse 4. And the Mishnah, remember, that's Jewish writings that were collected a couple of hundred years after Jesus had come, the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. So it might not be all that accurate as opposed to the temple practices back in Old Testament times. However, we do know that the temple in New Testament times, this is Herod's temple, and the temple itself had been taken apart by Herod the Great. He didn't take a wrecking ball, but he disassembled it and then reassembled it all without disrupting the sacrifice. That was a real feat. And he did a lot of these outer courts as well, but he didn't really change the terrain. So that, notice, you're going uphill as you get to the temple. And notice just outside the temple, you had these gates that you can see. Now, this is New Testament times. They were called the Nicanor gates. And leading up to them were 15 steps. Did you catch that? 15 steps corresponding to the 15 of the Psalms of Ascent. Now, I don't know if that was just happenstance or if that was deliberate, but one tradition has it in the Mishnah that these would be sung. The priest would come, or maybe worshipers would come and stand on the first step and sing the first Psalm of Ascent, and they'd go to the next step and sing the second, and work their way up the stairs. Now, I'm not saying that was its only use, but I think maybe that was a later use of this collection of psalms. So the ascending structure also can be described, by the way, and when we say songs of ascent, songs of going up, literally. Ascent means that, but I suppose ascent could take on some other meanings. And some have thought maybe this is the describing the ascending structure of at least some of those psalms where a term is introduced in one line and then it's echoed in the next line, or maybe two terms are introduced and one of those is echoed. And so it has what we could call staircase parallelism as you move up the psalm as you're getting to the end of the psalm. Now, that's also seen in other psalms outside this collection, so it's not unique to the Songs of Ascent, but perhaps that might be one of the reasons why these songs get that title. Most of these psalms are short. There's going to be one exception to that. I think it's around 130, in the 130s, if I remember correctly. Um, and they often mention Jerusalem and or the temple. But not this first one. This first one's not going to do that. So let's jump into this first song. Notice it's got the superscription, a song of ascents. Um, and here's the Hebrew. Shir is the word for song, and ha. Let's see, ha maluit. That's actually the Elam part is actually going up, And so songs of ascent's a good translation, or songs of going up. And now the song begins, "In my trouble, I cried to the Lord, and he answered me." So we're going to begin with a cry to the Lord, with a prayer, and then we begin to get what that prayer is in the next verse. Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips, from a deceitful tongue. Those are the problems that he's dealing with. Somebody's been saying some bad things about him, the psalmist. And notice it's first person. He's first person singular. It's not deliver us, it's deliver me, deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips, from a deceitful tongue. And people are saying bad things about him that are not true. Now, it's one thing to have people say things to you that are bad when they're true. You've got sort of no one to blame but yourself. But here, those are lying lips. This is a deceitful tongue, and this is parallelism. You're saying it, and then you're saying it a different way, with a using a different word, different terms. Verse 3, what shall be given to you? And notice these are going to be two questions. That deceitful tongue will be mentioned again. This is that ascending parallelism I talked about. Lying lips aren't mentioned again, but the deceitful tongue is. But the question is asked in verse 3. And notice we started with a call to the Lord. Then we had the problem of lying slander. And the question is, what shall be given to you? And what more shall be done to you, you who have the lying lips, you who are making work with that deceitful tongue? What's going to happen to you? Is God going to step in? And so notice he asks the question in verse 3. So that's where the problem in verses 1 and 2. He asked the question in verse 3. And now as we turn to verse 4, we're going to see the answer to the question. So let's go there. Verse 4, sharp arrows of the warrior. And when we hear of sharp arrows of the warrior, that's imagery. We're not necessarily talking literal, although it could be. But sharp arrows of the warrior, this is part of the judgment that God is going to bring. Notice, with the burning coals of the broom tree. Now, they added the term burning, but coals, if they're doing anything, usually have been burning. And a broom tree, that's actually a tree that's usually found out in the desert. Um, in this case, if we're talking about the coals or maybe the ashes of the broom tree, both of these are, I think, symbolic images of judgment against the slanderer. And so uh, the psalmist is hoping that God's going to intervene, but he hasn't done it yet. That God is going to intervene and bring his judgment, bring the sharp arrows, bring the broom tree, the coals of that, maybe to burn something out, to burn something down. Um, but it hasn't happened yet. So we go now to verse 5. Woe is me, for I sojourn in Meshech. Now, Meshech is actually a place that's named a couple of times in the scriptures, I think as early as Genesis chapter 10. One of those places way up in the north, a wild place to the north. So notice I sojourn in Meshech, for I dwell among the tents of Kedar. Now, the tents of Kedar's way down in the south. That's a wild place in the south. And you say, well, in which place is he living? Those places aren't next to each other. This would be like, I'm living out in outer Mongolia, or I'm living down in the deserts of Australia. In other words, he's off the beaten track. He's nowhere that he necessarily wants to be, and that's part of the problem. He's sort of in, can I say it, in Coventry. Maybe you understand that reference. Maybe you don't. That's okay if you don't. But he's in a bad place, in a faraway place, in a distant land, and he feels sort of distant, maybe even from the Lord. And so, verse 6, too long has my soul had its dwelling place with those who hate peace. He's in this distant place, and he still can't get far enough away because he's still with these people. Notice they're described as hating peace. Verse 7, I am for peace, but when I speak, notice they hate peace. I am for peace, but they are for war. And that's how the psalm is going to end. He's he's in this far off place. He wants peace. He wants to see peace, but when he tries to make it happen by talking about it, all he gets is lies and warfare and those who are against him. So we have the psalmist crying out in the first three verses to God for relief. We had in verse 4 where the psalmist expresses faith that justice will come. He's looking for God to eventually step in and bring judgment where it needs to be, but it hasn't come yet. He's not there yet. And so he's living in the tension between the promises of God and the fulfillment of those promises. Now, for the Christian today, we're doing the same thing. We live today in the tension between the victory that Jesus won on the cross. He has secured our salvation. He has conquered death, and yet death still happens, and it will continue to happen until the return of Christ. And so we live today in that tension between the already and the not yet, between the conquest and the fulfillment of that conquest, when every knee will bow and every tongue will finally confess that Jesus Christ is Lord.